Your Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks,
part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Jack Bushman. Real quick, just a reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, to please go and hit that like button for me. Jump in the comment section down below as well. Mailbag Monday. I know I won't be able to get your questions in for today's episode, but I'll be sure to bookmark them for this time next week. Subscribe to Locked On Blackhawks on YouTube if you haven't done so already. 100% free. It won't cost you anything and really does help me out tremendously as I'm on the climb to 2,000 subscribers. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all again for joining me on another episode of Locked On Blackhawks, your one-stop shop for all things Chicago Blackhawks. Real quick, just wanted to say, I'm sure those of you who are tuning in on YouTube have noticed there is no video coming in today. I'm actually on the road for New Year's Eve down in Nashville, so going audio only for the final episode of 2024. And to anyone who joined me along the ride in 2024, I know it hasn't been the most fun ride following along with the Chicago Blackhawks team. Been all the more frustrating considering what's going on with the broadcast stuff, but I thank you very much, and I wish you a happy new year and hope things go better for all of us Blackhawks fans in 2025. But last night, another sloppy loss for the Blackhawks out of the holiday break, their second in a row. They fell 5-1 to the Dallas Stars for their second consecutive lopsided defeat and fourth loss in a row overall. Definitely not how they wanted to be trending going into the Winter Classic against the St. Louis Blues, which I will be talking about and previewing here on today's episode during segment 2. So make sure to stick with me up until that point in the show. But especially disappointing what the Blackhawks have been doing here after they rattled off 3 wins in a row for the first time since February 2023, just a couple of weeks ago. Feels like they've kind of reverted back to looking how they did under Luke Richardson during this losing skid. And I've mentioned on the show there's going to be some growing pains, learning kind of a new system here on the fly under interim coach Anders Sorensen. There's going to be some growing pains. There's going to be some hiccups, but it's been tough here these last 4 games for the Blackhawks, and really 3 of them could have been lopsided losses. They fell behind huge early on in Calgary before a late push in that game made things interesting, and then 2 consecutive routes here coming out of the Christmas break to the hands of the Buffalo Sabres and the Dallas Stars. On the bright side, though, Blackhawks fans, at least Connor Bedard extended his point streak to 4 games with his 10th goal of the season to kick off the scoring for the Blackhawks last night on the power play. That now gives Bedard 6 goals in December, ties him for the most he's had in a month in his short career, can set a new career high should he go on to score in the Winter Classic tomorrow against the St. Louis Blues. And he also now has 7 goals and 10 assists for 17 points over his past 16 games since snapping his 12-game goal drought. So even though the Blackhawks offense remains stymied in these last 2 games, it's nice to see Connor Bedard at least picking up some production. And with the Blackhawks, as we know, not going to be sniffing playoff contention once again this year. It's truly all about the development of Connor Bedard and the rest of the young players. That's the name of the game the rest of the way here for us Blackhawks fans. So nice to see Bedard keep on with this nice stretch. I thought he, Hall, and Bertuzzi continue to do some nice things together. Expect them to remain as the top line for the Blackhawks tomorrow against the Blues. Blackhawks continue to get off to good starts for the most part. I believe this is now 22 or 23 times in 37 games they've scored the opening goal. They were tied 1-1 after 20 minutes, but the rest of the way remains an issue for this Blackhawks team. As far as what went wrong last night, though, against the Stars, as the Hawks were back at the United Center, I think the real turning point in the game was Tyler Bertuzzi getting a questionable 5-minute misconduct. That seemed to flip the momentum of the game because, as I mentioned, Blackhawks got off to yet another good start. Tough play there for Bertuzzi. Definitely thought he deserved to kind of swinging his elbow around carelessly. You just got to be in control of all your body parts and all your weapons. So I kind of understood why it was a 5-minute misconduct, I think more than most people did personally, but still was a little bit of a tough break there for the Blackhawks. And then, of course, The Stars go on to score just 12 seconds into their man advantage to grab the lead, and they never look back. So that was certainly a tough sequence there in the second period. Also, when the Blackhawks were down 3-1 going into the third, they were going to need a big push, especially early on in the third period, to kind of get some energy back in the United Center to give them that extra motivation. But nope, Wyatt Johnston scored 10 seconds into the third period to squash any hopes of a Blackhawks comeback. Not only has the third period been a problem for the Blackhawks, but the opening couple of minutes has really been an issue for them. Whenever, not 100% of the time, but a lot of the time this year, whenever it feels like they've needed a big final frame, things have just kind of been nipped in the butt real early and kind of given us fans a reason to be deflated. So hopefully that's something they'll be able to clean up, something certainly they're going to need to clean up to put an end to this losing skid. Another real huge issue in what went wrong for the Blackhawks last night is the Jones and Brody pairing was just a bad idea in general. Jones continues to struggle defensively since returning from injury. He was on the ice for 3 goals against last night, got beat and had a big say in a couple of them. TJ Brody on the ice for no goals, 4-2 against. Just don't really understand the idea behind putting those two together on the same defensive pairing when they aren't either really known for their defensive play at this stage of their career. Seth Jones is a capable defender, but I wouldn't say he's able enough to lean on in terms of having TJ Brody out there, who's been undoubtedly the worst defenseman of the season. I've been preaching for the Blackhawks to go back to the Alex Vlasic-Seth Jones pairing that will allow Nolan Allen to remain with Connor Murphy, which even Anders Sorensen said after the game they really liked the looks of that pairing. They've liked Louis Crevier with Alex Vlasic. Well, ultimately, I think you got to do what's best for your defensive unit as a whole. And Jones and Brody, that was just never going to be it. So their struggles last night played a huge impact in the Blackhawks' defensive struggles. And speaking of the Blackhawks' defensive struggles and TJ Brody continuing to be on the ice for goals against, but not face any repercussions for it when Anders Sorensen wants to preach accountability and, Wyatt Kaiser has a bad play that, it led to a game-winning goal and it was a deciding play in that game, but he didn't see the ice for the next couple of games as a healthy scratch and then gets sent to Rockford immediately after. We got to preach that accountability to TJ Brody, and I really hope that's going to happen here moving forward here, Blackhawks fans, as prior to this game last night against the Stars early on in Sunday afternoon, the Hawks announced that they had sent Kevin Korchinski back to Rockford after 9 games and had recalled Wyatt Kaiser. And I knew Kevin Korchinski was going to go back to Rockford. I even said it when they first called him up. I figured, there was a communication going on between the front office and Korchinski just from a numbers game. And, I think also Korchinski going down probably indicates Alec Martinez isn't all that far away either. Just from a numbers perspective, Korchinski was going to have to wow this coaching staff in order to stick around at the NHL level. And he did, play very well and looked so much better than he did last year. But we just need him to continue to develop at 20 years old in all situations, maybe not be plagued by all the losing that's probably going to be happening to this Blackhawks team the rest of the season. It was always in the cards for him to go back down to Rockford. I saw it coming. I don't think anyone should be surprised. This was not indicative of his play, but it is frustrating, and I get fans, asking me why Kevin Korchinski has to go down to Rockford and why we have to continue to play TJ Brody. I really hope Brody will have some more time as the 7th defenseman here with Wyatt Kaiser coming back up, because clearly Sorensen likes what Louis Crevier is doing. I'm a ho-hum on Crevier, but I'd probably rather have him in there than TJ Brody because, at least we can develop Crevier at the same point in time. Brody, he's just killing us on the back end, and it's not like he's going to be part of the future, right? Sadly, he's going to be part of the future here probably too long as he's got a 2-year contract. But Kaiser coming back up, he's got to be in the lineup, man. He was not playing as bad as, the result that he got in terms of the healthy scratching. I don't think he was deserving of that. He was playing a lot better, and he was having to play his offside on the top pairing with Alex Vlasic. And there were a lot of games where Kaiser did a lot of good things. And like Kevin Korchinski, he looked a lot better than he did last year. And just with him being a year ahead on the development plan, I think that's going to continue to be the case. So hopefully Wyatt Kaiser coming back up forces the coaching staff's hand a little bit more here. Going to be interesting to see what happens for the Blackhawks blue line when they take on the Blues in the Winter Classic tomorrow. There are my thoughts on the Blackhawks' fourth consecutive loss. But speaking of the Winter Classic, coming up in just a moment here, I'll preview tomorrow's matchup at Wrigley Field with the St. Louis Blues. But first, I need to talk to you all real quick about Rocket Money. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it so easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. And Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million worth of canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. So go and cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. Again, that's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. Segment 2, the Winter Classic has finally arrived with the Blackhawks, squaring off with the division rival St. Louis Blues at the iconic Wrigley Field. This will be the Blackhawks' NHL leading 7th outdoor game and the second time that they will host it at Wrigley Field, with the first coming way back on New Year's Day in 2009 against the Detroit Red Wings. Funny enough, I remember exactly where I was during that game, even though I was, I'd be 10 years old at that time. I remember exactly where I was at my buddy DJ's, kind of when my Blackhawks fandom was first starting, and I remember being absolutely heartbroken losing that game to the Detroit Red Wings. I remember, learning now on the other side of things, the Mike Babcock, the treating of Chris Chelios on the Red Wings in that game as, of course, a Blackhawks legend, not giving him any ice time. But yeah, that was an iconic game. You know, I believe at the time it was the second outdoor game ever, and obviously the NHL has just continued to grow and grow this stadium series, and it's been cool to see all the destinations they've taken it to over the years, but feels right that they're coming back to Wrigley Field for a fun matchup between the Blackhawks and the Blues. These two teams have met in the Winter Classic before, leading into a very lopsided loss for the Blackhawks. Don't really got to talk about that one. The only game that the Blackhawks have won out of the 6 they've been involved in so far came at Soldier Field back in 2014, I believe it was, against the Pittsburgh Penguins. That was when the snow was coming down. Jonathan Toews scored a breakaway goal. That's the only win the Blackhawks have in an outdoor game, but hopefully that changes when they hit the ice at Wrigley Field tomorrow afternoon. Weather sounds like it's going to be okay. Looking at it right now, temperature expected to be in the mid-40s. Little bit of a cause for concern. Obviously, you'd like it to be more close to freezing, but hopefully everything goes well from what I've read in previews from the NHL, which, you know, if things weren't expected to go well, it's not like they'd be out in the open admitting that, but sounds like everything sounds like it's set to go good. Hopefully that will be the case. Hopefully the ice will be good for the players out there. But for those who don't know, the game starts at 4 p.m. Central Time and will be televised on TNT, True TV, and Max. And I cannot express enough how happy I am that this game, not only being moved from New Year's Day to New Year's Eve, I just think it makes more sense in terms of, I know fans will come out regardless of when it's scheduled for, but I think it just makes more sense to have it on New Year's Eve and prior to kind of the festivities at night. There have been so many times over the last few years where the Blackhawks have just had a regularly scheduled game at like 7:30 on New Year's Eve. And I'm like, this is the most inconvenient thing ever. Who wants to be, especially with where the Blackhawks have been at over these last few years, like, who wants to tune into Blackhawks hockey? Been a real pain in my rear end these last few years. So super happy this game has been bumped up till 4 o'clock on New Year's Eve. And again, will be televised on TNT, True TV, and Max. A lot of outlets for all of you Blackhawks fans to watch through. Can't believe this is actually the first of 3 meetings between these two teams this season. We know where the Blackhawks are at in the standings, dead last. The Blues, 17-17-4 through their opening 38 games, currently has them 4 points back of a wild card spot in the Western Conference. It's been an eventful year, as it always seems to be for the St. Louis Blues. They, of course, picked up Jim Montgomery after he was fired from the Boston Bruins. They traded for Cam Fowler in the summer. They gave offer sheets to Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway from the Edmonton Oilers. They're doing everything they can to stay alive, but it's been a little bit of a struggle for them this season. They're 4-4-2 over their past 10 games, coming off of a 4-2 loss to the Buffalo Sabres in their last game on Sunday night. The Buffalo Sabres taking it to everyone. Looks like they're on a little bit of a roll here and have righted the ship a bit since coming out of the holiday break. Diving into some of the numbers for the St. Louis Blues, none of them very good. 28th on the power play, 27th on the penalty kill, 25th at the faceoff dot, 28th in the league in goals for, 14th in the NHL in goals against. So defensively, they're in the top half of the NHL. The Blackhawks remain in the top half in both special teams units, 13th on the power play, 3rd on the penalty kill now as shorthanded remains a huge shining star for this Blackhawk squad. Really struggle at the faceoff dot, though, although I will say the last 3 games they have done a much better job. Frank Nazar, Connor Bedard have been winning some faceoffs here recently, so hopefully that keeps up and we'll get this team some more puck touches in the offensive zone. Hawks, with their offensive output kind of taking a turn for the worse here during their 4-game losing skid. They're back to 30th in the NHL in goals scored per game. So 2 of the lowliest offenses in the NHL facing off on national television. Hopefully they bring their best stuff and we don't have like a 1-0 stinker on our hands. Goals against, the Blackhawks also defensively have struggled here a little bit and have fallen down to 26th in the NHL in goals against per game. Looking at individual player stats for the Blues, since we're unfamiliar with them, haven't faced them yet this year. Jordan Kyrou, Robert Thomas, unsurprisingly leading the way offensively. Kyrou's their leading scorer with 31 points. Robert Thomas next with 28. But other than those two, as I've been telling one of my buddies that I'm actually staying with here in Nashville that is a St. Louis Blues fan, there's just not a lot of speed on this Blues team other than Kyrou and Thomas up front. Their next leading scorers, Dylan Holloway has been a nice addition. He's got 24 points as their 3rd leading scorer, but, Pavel Buchnevich with 23 points, good net front power forward type of goal scorer, but not a play driver, not someone who plays with a ton of speed. Colton Parayko on the back end does have 21 points. He's been chipping in nicely, having a little bit of a bounce back here, but not known for his wheels and playing below the dots in the offensive zone or anything. And then Braden Shen next up in scoring with 19 points. Not exactly a speedster at this stage of his career either. And up front, just not the best supporting cast in terms of wheels for this Blues squad. So I can see why they're having struggles defensively. And then just as a team, they just have that aging blue line that's kind of left them in a little bit of a pickle and kind of left them in no man's land these last few years in terms of direction because they have all these blue liners with a ton of term. And then even Jordan Binnington in net, numbers aren't very good. 2.93 goals against, 895 save percentage. Honestly, seeing that, I'm a little surprised that the Blues are in the top half of the league in the defensive side of things. Obviously, we're still over 24 hours removed from the Winter Classic here, so I'm just taking a little bit of a stab at the Blues lineup. But this is what they had when they faced off with the Sabres last night. Pavel Buchnevich, Robert Thomas, and Alexander Texier as the top line. Dylan Holloway, Braden Shen, and Jordan Kyrou as the second. Jake Neighbors, Oscar Sundqvist, and Zach Bolduc as the third line. And then Blackhawks legend Brandon Saad with Nathan Walker and Alexei Toropchenko as the fourth line. Cam Fowler, the new addition from the Anaheim Ducks, one of the best American defensemen of all time from the USNDTP, playing with Colton Parayko on the top pairing. Philip Broberg, who's getting the bag here in St. Louis, but from what I've heard has been backing it up nicely so far here on the second pairing with Justin Falk. And then Ryan Suda, the old man, Father Time, on the third pairing with Tyler Tucker. Jordan Binnington expected to get the nod between the pipes. For the Blackhawks, I know they have a 4-game losing skid here, but I'd still be a little surprised if they switched up the forward lines. I fully expect Taylor Hall and Tyler Bertuzzi to remain on the top line with Connor Bedard. They've been working rather well. Where I could see the change, just like what I outlined in the preview episode of the matchup with the Stars that I dropped on Saturday, it would be the second and third lines. Foligno, Nazar, and Donato have obviously been working together the last few games, and then Teravainen, Dickinson, and Mikheyev have been the third line. The change to me would be flip-flopping Foligno and Donato with Teravainen and Mikheyev, bumping up Tavo and Mikheyev with Frank Nazar to create more of an offensive line there, and then having Foligno and Donato come down with Dickinson and establishing more of a shutdown, solid, defensive-minded third line. I feel like Nazar's just kind of been caught in between. He had a noticeable game last night. I thought he was noticeable against the Stars. So maybe that was enough, and we've seen Sorensen obviously be more patient with his forward lines than Luke Richardson was earlier on in the year, which has been nice. But I do wonder after, a second consecutive drumming, it's time to switch things up a little bit. And if he does feel that way, that's where I would see the changes coming in the forward group. Fourth line, I expect to remain the same. Pat Maroon, Lucas Reichel, Philip Kurashev, Craig Smith still out with a back injury. I don't think there's any reason to draw Joey Anderson in for this game. Kurashev, I think his speed has been noticeable along with Lucas Reichel on the fourth line. Not getting a ton of opportunity down there, but I think he's done enough to remain in the lineup and does make sense down there on that fourth line with Reichel and Maroon. On the defensive side of things for the Blackhawks, I'd love to see Vlasic and Jones reunite with one another. I think it only makes sense. You can go back to Allen and Murphy as the second pairing. I know Kaiser and Brody as the third. That's cause for concern, but quite honestly, you're going to have to play Brody with someone if you're going to have him in the lineup, and it feels like Sorensen's just continuously going to play him. I hope the message gets sent. I don't know if it's going to come in a big game like the Winter Classic where you don't really want maybe a youngster like Louis Crevier to be too afraid of the moment. So I don't expect TJ Brody to be scratched, but I think you got to get Wyatt Kaiser back in there. Wyatt Kaiser, if it comes down to Wyatt Kaiser or TJ Brody, if Anders Sorensen is so persistent on having Louis Crevier in the lineup, you got to have Kaiser over Brody, in my opinion. Yeah, absolutely got to. I don't care what Brody's getting paid. He's not getting it done in the defensive zone. He's been the biggest liability defenseman the Blackhawks have had all season long, and they've had an influx of different young defensemen in the lineup, and TJ Brody has been the biggest liability of them all. So I hope there's more accountability for TJ Brody. Sorensen loves to preach it to everyone else, and I'm not really knocking Sorensen here. I get the tough situation that he's in because of the contract that Kyle Davidson gave out to TJ Brody, but enough is enough at some point in time. We'll see what winds up happening when the Blackhawks hit the ice. I don't know if they're going to have practice here today before the Winter Classic, but we'll see what winds up going down for them on the defensive side of things. Peter Mrazek, even though there have been some hiccups and bumps in the road these last few games, I think he's got to be the one to get the nod in goal for the Blackhawks in the Winter Classic. He absolutely deserves it for what he's done these last couple of years. Soderblom didn't have a great start last night against the Dallas Stars. They've been going with a 1A, 1B back and forth type of split here recently, so all indications to me would lead to Peter Mrazek getting the go for the Blackhawks in net for the Winter Classic. That wraps up my Winter Classic preview against the St. Louis Blues. I hope everyone sits back and enjoys on New Year's Eve. Coming up in just a moment here before I wrap up today's episode, I still have to get into my weekly Mailbag Monday fan segment. Back here on the Locked On Blackhawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just wanted to thank you all again for making Locked On Blackhawks your very first listen here to start off your day. For your second listen, make sure to go and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast so that you can become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. And you can easily find the link to Locked On Fantasy Hockey down in the description or simply search on YouTube and wherever you may be listening to your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Segment 3, before I close things out, still got to get into Mailbag Monday. And a reminder, if you're watching or listening to this, make sure to hit me with your Blackhawks-related questions. I know Christmas, New Year's, it's a busy week, so I didn't expect to have a ton of questions here on today's episode, but want to make sure to rack them up again for next week's edition. I had a good slew of them last week, and it was a lot of fun. So please, if you're watching this on YouTube right now, drop your Blackhawks question down in the comment section. If you're tuning in through an audio platform, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever it may be, you can leave your question in the review section, by the way, preferably along with a 5-star rating. Those are always great. But you can also reach out on any one of my social media channels or even email lockedonblackhawks@gmail.com. First question I wanted to get to here today comes from @Chase344793334. Too many numbers to list that out. The question is, can you help explain to me why Brody plays and not Kaiser? I just kind of outlined it a moment ago, but it's truthfully just because of the contract that TJ Brodie signed. Because he is a veteran, signed on at $3.75 million. I'm sure he was told in the offseason that he'd get a good opportunity to come here in Chicago, because you look at this team on paper, and even though Nick Foligno was out there recruiting and telling people this is a team that's on the up and up, the organization treats people the right way and all that good stuff, I'm sure TJ Brodie was told he was going to get a pretty good opportunity on the back end. That's ultimately, along with the money that the Blackhawks could give him out there, I'm sure that's why he elected to come to Chicago, knowing this wasn't going to be a winning team this season. So I'm sure that's probably part of it, but it really is just the contract, him being paid $3.75 million. But to me, when this is a year that's all about development, and quite honestly, as I even talked about when the signing was first announced, I didn't understand the Blackhawks bringing in both Alec Martinez and TJ Brodie. It didn't make sense from a numbers perspective with all the young defensemen arriving on the scene. And I know not all of them are going to be NHL ready, but I think Kyle Davidson did a little bit of a poor job taking into account exactly who and how many were going to be ready to come up to the scene, because it clearly just seems like they added one too many. And I know he probably did that with a purpose, because he wanted this team to take a next step and be more of a veteran bunch and win more games. But TJ Brodie has been the exact opposite. And at the end of the day, when we're not prioritizing development and not winning games, like, what are we doing here at that point? You got to be playing at least the youngsters if we're not going to be winning games and showing progression. And TJ Brodie hasn't been helping us make that progress. So, yeah, I'm right there with all you Blackhawks fans. I'm just as frustrated. If you've been a consistent listener, then you know I've been preaching to have TJ Brodie come out of the lineup. And yeah, Wyatt Kaiser, I think he absolutely deserves to play in the Winter Classic. I didn't think he deserved to be healthy scratch for multiple games in a row following that poor decision in New Jersey. I didn't think he deserved to be sent to Rockford. But deserve, doesn't really matter in this type of business. I just hope the Blackhawks handle that situation a little bit better moving forward. Next question comes from Isaac Guerrero, 8872. Isaac, always appreciate you reaching out with your questions. What contending team would take Hall 50% retained plus sweetener Phillips/Crevier for 2025 or 2026 first round pick? Isaac, I hate to break it to you, man, but I don't think there's any team out there that's going to give a first round pick. The Blackhawks would really have to sweeten the pot in order to get a first round pick for Taylor Hall. And Isaac Phillips and Louis Crevier, who are fringe NHL defensemen, isn't going to be enough to sweeten the pot. The Blackhawks, even if they do retain 50% of Taylor Hall, it's still $3 million. There's still not a lot of teams that can easily squeeze that in. Blackhawks, they're not going to, if they're going to be trading Taylor Hall, they're not going to be getting a first round pick for him. We can't have that expectation. I wish it was in the bag. I just don't see it being possible. I would say if the Blackhawks do trade Taylor Hall, it would more than likely be for a third round pick, because he does have that $3 million AAV. Even if they do retain it, they might have to get a third team involved, possibly. And even then, I don't know if they want to trade Taylor Hall, because he has speed, which the Blackhawks need in their forward group. He has been playing much better here as of late. Possibly could be a good winger for Bedard the rest of the way. There are reasons to not trade Taylor Hall as well. But even if they do, they're not going to be getting a first-round pick for him. They'd have to give up a high-level prospect along with Taylor Hall to get that type of return. Next question comes from Henry Conlin, who asked, who's going to be the better defenseman, Kevin Korchinski or Sam Rinzel? Good question. For those of you who don't know, Sam Rinzel has been a monster for Minnesota so far during his sophomore season. Not only one of the best defensemen in all of college hockey, but one of the best players. 20 points through 20 games, his 8 goals and 20 points, both tied for the most among NCAA defensemen, and he's still only 20 years old, like Kevin Korchinski, even though he was drafted the year prior. Lots of runway for both of these two guys. It's hard to say that Sam Rinzel is going to be the better of the defenseman when we've only seen him at the college scene. We haven't seen him really against true grown men. So until we see him, at the professional level, it's truly just a guess. But I think Kevin Korchinski is going to be the better of the two. I think he's got the better wheels. Rinzel's got the bigger frame, and I think he's more set up to be better in the defensive zone. But I think Kevin Korchinski is the better skater and has the higher offensive upside. We just kind of get our vision skewed because Korchinski has been at the NHL level the last 2 years, while Rinzel's been putting up good numbers, yes, but at college hockey, two completely different things. It's going to be fun, though, watching both of these guys develop, and I think Sam Rinzel is going to be a stud. Both of these guys, I think, are going to be big puzzle pieces for the Blackhawks down the road. Last question that I got today comes from Weston Lucier, who asked, Jack, do you see the Blackhawks adding a forward at the trade deadline to help out this group? Bedard needs more help than what he's got right now. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks. Thank you for reaching out. It would have to be a real perfect situation for the Blackhawks to add at the deadline, especially when you have someone like Colton Dach knocking on the door. Landon Slaggert, I doubt he gets called up this year, but he's someone who could earn a call up. There's still Cole Gutman there. There's going to be potentially some guys coming onto the scene at the end of the year from college. I don't see it happening. I wouldn't completely rule it out, but it would have to be a real right situation where the Blackhawks, it would have to be a win for them. They wouldn't have to be giving up a, high-level prospect or a ridiculous draft pick or something that Kyle Davidson wouldn't want to do with the Blackhawks being where they're at in a rebuild. But I definitely think they're going to be addressing that in the offseason. We know they're going to have a ton of cap space, and they can't roll back what they have right now into next year when they're trying to make progress. So fully expect the Blackhawks to be aggressive in this year's free agent class. Mitch Marner, Mikko Rantanen, those would be two lovely additions. I'd love to see the Blackhawks go after Mikko. I don't know if Davidson's going to be willing to spend that type of bag, but it's going to be interesting to follow throughout the offseason. I do expect the Blackhawks, like I said, to be among the main aggressors, though, for a forward. I don't think it's going to be happening ultimately at this year's trade deadline, though. But that's going to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Blackhawks. As always, thank you again for joining me on the show. Be sure to go and subscribe to the channel. 100% free, won't cost you anything, and really does help me out tremendously. Follow Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you may listen to your podcast as well. That way you can get the latest episode as soon as it becomes available each and every day. I'm your host, Jack Bushman. You can find me on X at JackBushman2, but make sure that you follow at Talkin' Hockey for all the latest Blackhawks news and updates. So until the next episode, everyone, the final episode of 2024, everyone, enjoy your New Year's. Have a safe and happy New Year. I'll see you in 2025 on the next episode of Locked On Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.